Black mask, I'm a nuisance, pound and a plan, trying to be Bruce Wayne. I ain't slowed down since about last May, cause this grind don't sleep and I dream all day. And I'm far from sane, cursed with a gift, my only saving grace. Firstborn son and they think I'm crazy, till the sky falls and they see my reign. First thing, they don't know about the vision, no wonder why there's all eyes on me. Came from a place where the grass ain't green, so the blood, sweat and tears really stain my tea. And I can't find sleep, always awake, guess it ain't that deep. Everywhere I go, I'm just counting sheep, so I gotta lead the way like little Bo Peep on the kid.
The struggles of racism globally has never been as prevalent as it is today, with the continuous importance of Black Lives Matter being a necessary conversation in modern society. With sport often seen as a reflection of society, the need for black representation is paramount too. What are the views of those on black representation in sports and in women's football?
I think the women's game, I think, is absolutely useless. It's just useless because, you know, you look at other leagues like Italy who have a racism problem themselves. How have they have more black women in their league? How is Italy, that country that people like to put down, got better representation for women in their league? Actually, you know what? A lot of, the Italian FA is a mess itself. But that there's a lot of clubs who have come out time and time and time again backing their players, and men's and women's league there. How many teams in the Premier League have actually backed their players?
If you look at the Premier League, the Bundesliga, Serie A, French League, La Liga, there's no question about how diverse the pitch is, and that's why they attract so much fans. And for me, I even saw a comment online the other day, and it was saying that the WSL is one of the best women's leagues in the world. And I looked at it and I was thinking, but I don't see myself represented on the pitch enough. I know we've had black players on there. We've, the likes of Enya Luko, Anita Asante, who chose to represent England respectively. But I don't feel like I see myself represented enough on that pitch, and it's really hard to attract me to watch games and to enjoy that league when I can't see, myself being represented. It will be very difficult for me to encourage a young black girl, from Africa or even from the UK, that she can make it in the WSL when there isn't enough women in there representing her.
The England team was a lot more diverse 20 years ago than it is now. And how on earth have we lost diversity in the Lionesses squad to the point where 15 years ago there were, let's say, 6 diverse players, in terms of racially diverse players, within the squad, and now there's probably about 2 if you count Nikita Paris and you count Demi Stokes. Except for the most recent camp, neither of those players were there. So you've now got the most recently selected England team of all white faces. That's unbelievable in this day and age.
I don't think enough has been done for a long time. I think there used to be gateways and ways to get into the England setup at younger level, under 15, 17, whatever that period was. And I know a lot of players came from Sunderland, for instance, when Sunderland were one of the top teams. They brought through, you Lucy Bronze's, Steph Horton's, Jill Scott's. There were a lot of players that came into the England setup, but not enough around all of these other areas. It was as if for quite a long period of time, the FA relied on 3 or 4 hubs in the entire country to select their crop for the future England teams. And it's not good enough. I've thought for many years there is not enough diversity or representation in the England team. And let's face it, they are the poster girls. The Lionesses. I've been speaking to an agent recently, quite privately, about the fact that Welsh internationals are struggling to get boot deals compared to some England players that have literally got a couple of caps that are being given boot deals. Yet you've got some Welsh internationals on 80 plus caps and can't get one. That's because the Lionesses gathers so much interest, certainly around the major tournaments. And because of the success to date, And yeah, we have had some players over the years, but the fact that I can probably name them, it means that there's not enough. And I do not believe, just looking through the leagues, and if you go down into the lower leagues of women's football, there are some very, very talented players. I just don't think they've been given the opportunity. I don't think they were found. I don't know whether those gateways have improved. I really hope they have. But I think there's an element of, I'm going to say it, laziness to that recruitment. And it goes back to and harps back to the days of having the places like Lillishall, where everyone went and were picked out of nice schooling areas.
You know, the more people or the more women we see in senior positions, for example, Eniona Luco, who's, you know, doing a terrific job at Aston Villa, Anita Asante, who's had a very good career in the women's game. I think the more influx of black women going into the game will have a trickle effect to the rest of the young black girls that are coming up. So I don't have the solution to how they do that, but what I would say is that you need to give more, you know, black females opportunities to show that they're good enough.
Yeah, ultimately, you can't be what you can't see. That's what it comes down to. And I think any industry, whether it's sport, business, it's much more better off if there's a diversity in that sport. And I think the women's game is improving. We shouldn't really be comparing it to the men's, because I treat it as a separate entity. But I think from what I've seen, I'm not going to lie, I'm not the most well versed in it. So I'm trying to learn. I'm trying to read things, open up my brain, go into conversations. Like I've been educating myself on Clubhouse. I don't have the solutions, but I think that it probably does need to be much more accessible. You know, we speak to women footballers on our platforms and they talk about their stories of coming from humble beginnings and stuff like that. So I think, I don't know, bursaries or schemes to make sure people from a certain demographic can come into the sport. I think that might be the way. But as I said, I don't have all the answers to that.
You know, the one thing that I would add to that is I think it's right that it's really difficult to answer, and no one really has the answer at this point in time. But whilst I agree that it's not really fair to compare the men's and the women's games for a host of different reasons, I think there are definitely certain things that we can take from the men's game as learnings that we can deploy across the women's game. And again, thinking about things from the perspective of a consumer, growing up, part of the reason why we wanted to be the next Ronaldinho, the next Thierry Henry, was because we saw them. We saw these players not just on the field, but we saw them in advertisement campaigns. We saw them in the mass media. And I think that part of having more black and ethnic minority women in the game is down to seeing more of them and their profile and their presence being shared more amongst young black and ethnic minority women. And so it may not even necessarily just be the job of the FA and the people in the game, but also the sponsors around the game. We need to see more adverts from Lucozade or from Under Armour or from Puma and the likes of these kind of women, because ultimately, as Dej said, you can't be what you can't see. And so the onus is not just on the governing bodies within football, but also sponsors and people that work around the game to help increase coverage of these particular individuals.
I think the game has gotten to a point where it doesn't want to recognize that he has an issue, and it's, it likes, like I said before, it likes to market itself as this inclusive, diverse place. It likes to market itself as an opposition to men's football and stuff, but it's just going in the exact same direction as men's football. It really frustrates me. I'm getting really angry, but it really frustrates me because it's like we go to grassroots games and you look at these ballers. These girls, young girls, are ballers. Where are they? The game is focused on the wrong issues. It's focusing on money, sponsorship, marketing, whatever, when actually it's not focusing on player development. It's not focusing on making sure that the best players are actually playing in the league. It's not focusing on the things that it likes to market itself as like diversity and inclusion and whatever. So it's kind of like, why has the game gotten to the point where it's like, this is the focus that we're going to be doing, instead of actually being like, this is where we need to improve on. My overall thing is like, the women's game, if it really actually cared about what it was preaching, would shut itself down, break it all down, and start again. Because for me personally, it's not at that level where if you completely dissolve all of the leagues, it's going to affect it that much.
Every girl should have an opportunity to play football, and there's, the FA has done a lot with their game plan for growth to try and, grow women's football and grow girls' football in this country. And they've achieved a lot, and the numbers are really good, and it should definitely be celebrated. But I think there's still work to do. And one of those areas for me is around providing pathways and opportunities for talent that might not look like what talent has been identified as in the past. And I am sure that there are lots of really talented young female footballers who, for economic reasons, cannot access the academies, the girls' academies in this country, be that because they live in a certain area where you've got to travel miles to get there, and so financially they just can't do that, or physically they can't because they haven't got someone who can drive them, to not even feeling like they would have a chance of doing that anyway. So I think it's on different levels. I think one is a sort of engage and empowerment level of inspiring these girls to believe in their own talent, because that's something that's really big in women and girls in general, regardless of, be it sport or in the workplace or anything, is sort of believing in our own ability and trying out things that we probably are capable of, but we don't necessarily think we are. But I also think it's the logistics of getting an athlete to an environment that they would probably thrive in. But how do we get them there? I don't have the answers for that, and I'd be more than happy to work with people on coming up with some of those solutions. But I do think otherwise we end up with academies and the national team like just looking like one type of player, and I think that there's lots of talented young girls out there, and we need to think about how we give them access, so that, because for me it's about every single player playing in an environment that helps them get to the best of their ability, because obviously not everyone is going to play for England, not everyone is good enough to be a lioness, but let's make sure we've created pathways that are open to everyone, so that we can determine who is good enough and who isn't.
With the gateways to the England senior national team being a cause of concern, where the progression of black players seems to be hindered from grassroots level up until professional status, how do those off the pitch feel about the representation in their respective fields?
I think that people are crying out for diversity, even if they don't want it. They know that it will make them look good. If they decide to support a young black ethnic minority, any ethnic minority, but being myself, young and black woman, it will make them look a whole lot better if they support and follow a young white woman, just because they have the pride in saying, well, I'm not racist, I support an ethnic minority, I'm following young black women. So I think, if anything, for me personally, being my age, because I am still fairly young, if you'd have asked me this, me being a black woman 10 years ago, I don't think it would be the same answer. I think people were very still in a fixed mindset. But now, today, and the way that the world is changing, I think that people, and you know what, I sort of wish it wasn't that. I wish that people weren't doing it for their own good and to and for the diversity reasons, and even maybe a little bit out of pity. I genuinely don't, but I'm also not complaining. You know, I can't have my cake and eat it. If people are gonna get on board with me for the sake of me being an ethnic minority, and they want to support diversity, then, you know, you do you. I'm just going to do me, and if that's the way that people are looking at it, then I can't control that.
Or in the media, or listening to radio, or whichever type of media platform, and I can never hear or see somebody who looked like me. So the Be the Change series, it allowed us to show people who are like me and doing things like me. Like, you know, speaking to Jessica Crichton, you know, she's a black woman on Sky Sports. Like, that's amazing for so many black women who are trying to get into the media industry. You know, you look at the Beautiful Game podcast, you know, they're just three black guys from the ends who made a podcast and are doing absolutely massive things right now. Same with Gold Diggers, you know, they're an amazing group of ladies, and they're continuing to break down barriers and just produce amazing content and like, it's not a matter of it's because they're women, like they just make great content. Like, the Be the Change show was so important, especially for people who, you know, were in the last diversification of the sports media program course, like myself, like who are trying to make their way into the industry. It's like, I've had people message me say, you know, they watch the interviews, which is always an honor to hear, but it's like they learned that they was able to learn something from the person who I've interviewed, like learn something from their journey, and you know, they can adopt that to their own lifestyle and, you know, try to make their way into the industry as well.
Isn't where black males coming into this space. Our mindset is excellence. And we believe naturally, if you're producing good content, if you're working to the best of your ability, the cream always rises to the top. So like anything we do, we want to make sure we do it to the best of our ability in terms of production, in terms of our performances when we're doing these podcasts. We like judge ourselves to the highest of standards. And I think we sort of saw a gap when we were looking at the podcast. When we started interviewing players, there was a gap in terms of production. I think the sort of mindset before with podcasts was, let's have a jolly up on a Sunday and just release the content. And we thought, you know, let's invest in ourselves. Let's put money down. Let's put money where our mouth is, because we believe in ourselves. We know that we're not just wasting money or spending frivolously. We know that if we invest in ourselves now, there'll be a long-term dividend. So I think in terms of being different or investing in yourself, I'll always say that that's the way you should go, because long-term you'll get your benefits. But in terms of the space, the way it's changed, I think, you know, it's evident, it's clear for everyone to see that, you know, before Sky and all those platforms used to monopolize the market, but now there's lower barriers to entry in terms of like YouTube and producing your own content. But a lower barrier to entry means there's higher barriers to succeed, because the more hoops you're going to have to go through to be able to produce the content. And that's something we're comfortable with. And ultimately, the people will decide. That's what these big organizations are noticing, that, oh, hold on a minute, this guy on YouTube's getting 150k viewers. We're only getting this. What's going on? We need to see what's happening over there. And that's why you're starting to see these big corporations tap into that market and bring them onto their platforms, because they recognize that times are changing, the demographics are changing. It's a younger audience. People, more importantly, want people that they can connect with to serve them the content. And I think that's what we've done. We're probably more relatable to these players, and they feel much more open, you know, speaking to us. We listen to a similar type of music. We speak their lingo. And these are all things that are attractive to the viewer.
When you have these individuals, what they do is they make the conversation very comfortable to have. If we're speaking specifically about race, racial issues is not a comfortable conversation. If we're talking about race properly, everyone in the room should feel comfortable, because it's like, you know what, there's something wrong here. People have felt done hard by, and we need to address it. But if you bring individuals in the room that can make that comfortable conversation and kind of appease the listeners or the viewing public and whatnot, it benefits you to do that. And that's why the Same Voices are brought on. Prime example I would give is, if they really cared about kind of like black racial issues, then why are some of the footballers that have experienced this, that have really spoken up about it, not invited to speak about it? Thinking about that just alone, you quickly find out, okay, because if they come and say how they truly feel, does that affect someone's pocket? Does that affect someone's viewership? Does it affect the viewership of the whole situation, of the whole organization? That's the key thing, and we won't move forward or get any better at dealing with anything if we keep having these comfortable PC conversations about real life issues that affect people within communities. And that's the key reason why I think specific individuals or the same individuals are often sent back to say the same thing, have the same conversation, do the same interview. And it's ironic because all of that is same, but the situation's no different. Nothing's happened, nothing's changed, nothing's improved. You come back every 3 months and say exactly the same thing. So we need a different approach.
And as a white person and as a white female, I need to be okay to ask the obvious questions. So how do you identify? Do you know, and trying to understand the difference between Black Jamaican or Black African or whatever it might be, because when I'm having these conversations, there are so many layers to it. And I feel like I have, for most of my life, worn what I would say is a white mask. So if I'll give you an example, doing an educational workshop on nutrition, we deliver advice to every player which is white masked. So it might be white nutritional foods as an example, and actually when we're talking about all of these cultures and ethnicity, food looks completely different. The way food is prepped, the way food is cooked, the time where people eat. So we've got to open our mind to the diversity of thoughts surrounding a nutritional workshop as an example. And one thing that really fascinated me was they spoke about having to wear a white mask. So if they were going to have a conversation with a white person, a white player, a white man, then they would feel like they would have to alter their communication, their language, and be mindful of how their behavior and actions changed when they were having these different conversations with different ethnicities themselves. And one of them even, you know, joked to me that they felt because they were straight, they might not have as many opportunities in the women's game, which I think was said in jest, but if any female has thought that at any moment in time, again, is perhaps a bit of a moment for pause and reflection, really.
Stops progress from being made for Black people in particular is when initiatives or interventions around solving problems are too generic and they're not specifically aimed at supporting Black people's progression, their experiences, reducing racism towards Black people in particular. That is never going to be successful if you start diluting it. So some of the programs that exist in football at the moment are around management. They're around BAME or BAME managers and coaches. Now, to be honest, the issues affecting people from an Asian background in football are massive, and they're very different from the issues that are affecting Black players getting management positions in football. So just having a programme which caters to BAME, it's gonna fail because it's not specific enough. Similarly, the Premier League and the EFL, they both have this standard that's called the Premier League Quality Standard and the EFL Code of Practice, which clubs have to adhere to as regulation to set up equality and diversity practices and processes behind the scenes of their clubs. Nobody for a second thought, as part of this, we've got over 35% Black players playing in these leagues. Let's have something specifically for Black people as part of this standard. How are they reviewing it to make sure that this is impactful for Black people within the industry? Are they using Black consultants to come in and shape how this works? The answer is no, and they're not doing that. So if you need to do it properly. Pay Black experts. There's a lot of amazing experts in this space in football, and it needs to be specific for Black people. It needs to be intersectional, don't get me wrong, like there needs to be initiatives in the women's game. There needs to be, in the rise of the LGBT plus movement in football, there needs to be recognition that Black LGBT plus people exist and we need to provide spaces for them and visibility for them. So that, for me, what Black Lives Matter should look like in football.
have really shown that there are significant issues in our society. When the Black Lives Matter movement became even more prevalent, I think that, you know, it came at a time where the world was standing still, coronavirus was happening, everybody was on lockdown, so everybody was able to really examine how things were, and to, you know, a lot of people learned about racism in that time, and sports has really been a big platform with seeing players kneel and have Black Lives Matter. And a lot of people may think that, you know, it's just for show, or that it's just to put on a good face, but that those little things make a difference. Makes a difference for Black people. It makes a difference for the players that have been asking for help for years and that haven't been giving the help. It helps people who are struggling with mental health issues because of this. A lot of players have spoken out about how racism has affected them as a player. And so Black Lives Matter simply means that, especially in sports and in society, we do need to look at, you know, how people are treated and how specifically Black people are treated, because clearly it is unfair. And, you know, it has been difficult to look at a lot of the comments. So, you know, when Sky put out something about Black Lives Matter, or the BBC, I looked at the comment on Twitter, on social media, and the comments a lot of the times are horrendous, and they really do show that we have so much work to do for people to simply think that, yes, Black people do matter, and it shouldn't be that difficult of a concept to accept, especially when every Sunday they're cheering on their favorite player, and that favorite player may be Black, yet they still have a hard time saying Black Lives Matter. And sports is often a reflection of society. And so sports needs to improve, society needs to improve, the fans need to improve, and to make sure that sports really is for everyone. And saying that Black Lives Matter should be seen as the norm. So I think that the way sports and broadcasters have handled that have been really great. The response, unfortunately, has not always been great, but I think that's part of it, and that's part of how things will progress.
You have to just continue pushing the envelope. Excellence. I mean, I went to a game last week, Crystal Palace against Fulham, and I looked in the press box, and it was only me and Adrian Kajumba out of like 30, 40 people watching the game. That's 2 Black people, and it's not good enough. But I believe you shouldn't be deterred. You should see it as a challenge. A lot of people think, you know what, Black people can't get into this space, I'm not going to try, or there's no point me trying. But I think there's always a way through. Like, why not be the first? Why not provide that example? And that's something that we try and do through the quality of our work. Like, in this game, there's no gimmies, there's no handouts. You need to force the change. So I think we're seeing it already. Different types of journalists. Like, you've got Flex, you've got the boys at Stoppage Time, Dapo, On the Judy. I believe that over a period of time, if you're putting out great content, you're consistent with it, you can break down these barriers.